Hello everyone, in this video we'll be going over the roles of the Proposition 1 and Opposition 1 speakers. In MSPDP, every speaker has its own unique role, so in this video we'll be specifying to the first speech. Let's first start off with the first thing you need to do as a first speaker, which is the hook and introduction. The hook, as the name implies, is intended to grab the judge's attention. To do so, try to make this a significant statistic or a quote from a well-known person. Introductions, on the other hand, are when you introduce yourself to the judge and opposing team. The introduction includes your name, what side you're on, what speaker you are, and the topic which you're debating. Keep in mind that while hooks are optional, introductions are not. You need to introduce yourself in every single debate. Let's do a drill. Pause this video and decide which of the following sentences would work as the best introduction for the topic dogs are better than cats. Keep in mind that there might be multiple right answers. Ready? The first one only mentions the speaker's name and the side, giving no information whatsoever about the topic or the speaker, meaning it isn't a good way to start your speech because it's missing information. The second option doesn't give any information about the speaker's name, role, side, or topic, meaning it's also not correct. Additionally, the second person doesn't actually mention anything important. They repeat the same thing again and again and may seem unnecessarily rude by saying the judge, quote unquote, shouldn't listen to their opponents. In the third example, you can see that the speaker provides all four pieces of information needed in the introduction, therefore making it a proper introduction. Last but not least, let's look at the fourth option. Unlike the rest of the introductions, the speaker also gives a hook, which in this case is a statistic that draws the judge's attention since it shows how many people own dogs. This makes the fourth one the best way to start your speech, although the third introduction also works. Moving on to the second part of the speech, which is the background information and definitions. The background information is information that the judge will need to know in order to make a good decision, in order to give the judge more context about the topic. For example, you could talk about something that happened recently related to the topic. Try not to spend too much time on this though, since the judge only needs a basic understanding of the topic. Additionally, the first proposition speaker should also spend time giving definitions, which are basically clarifications to words in the topic. The opposition speaker generally agrees with the definitions, but in the event that the definition is not fair, the opposition first speaker can bring up their own definitions. Keep in mind though, the only reason the opposition first speaker should bring up their own definitions is if the proposition first speaker's definitions are unfair. Now, these are two common topics in MSPDP debate. What words do you think need to be specified or clarified? Pause the video, and when you have your answer, feel free to unpause. Ready? For the first one, while it's relatively obvious what homework is, you should define what grades the topic applies to. Is it kindergartners, 12th graders, college students? Generally, we stick to K to 12 in debate, so kindergarten to 12th grade. Another important point to consider is whether studying for a test counts as homework, since technically it's work that you're doing at home. In the second topic, you should also talk about which grades have uniforms and what a public school is. Additionally, mandatory should also be defined. How will it be enforced that students should wear school uniforms? Moving on to the main purpose of first speakers, which is presenting points, also known as arguments. As the first speaker, you'll be devoting the majority of your speech's time to build your team's argument, so try to say between 2 to 3 points. Most of the time, the first speaker says about half of the team's arguments. Remember to use the Arisi format, which we covered in a previous video titled Argument Structure. On that note, let's review. What does Arisi stand for? Write it down on a paper in front of you, and when you're ready, unpause the video. Ready? Arisi stands for assertion, reasoning, evidence, source, and impact. If these concepts seem new to you, please go back and watch the argument structure video. Last but not least, let's take a look at refuting in the first speeches. Before we dive into refutes, remember that Proposition 1 is the first speaker of the debate, so refuting doesn't apply to them because they don't have anything to refute. However, if you're the Opposition 1 speaker, you're going to refute the arguments that Prop 1 brought up. Make sure you balance your time with both refuting and saying points. Refuting is when you directly respond to the new arguments brought up by opponents in the previous speeches. It's when you're explaining why your opponent's arguments either aren't true or are the opposite of what your opponents are saying. You always want to refute as the first thing in your speech. This is because the judges just listen to your opponent's points, so it'll allow the judge to better contextualize both the points and the refutes if you refute at the beginning of your speech. It also makes it easier for the judge to compare both sides in the debate. When you refute, you want to identify the argument you want to refute. Choose which point you're responding to. Then you want to think about what's not logical in the point. Does the evidence not tie into the overall point? Is the source outdated? Do they not have an impact? Is this part of the point contradictory? Try to find portions of the point that you think are incorrect or that don't make sense. If you don't know where to start, you could go down the Reezy format and respond to each component. You can respond to the reasoning, then the evidence, then the source, and then the impact, and generally that's the easiest way to cover all your bases. Additionally, you can compare your points with your opponents and explain why your points make more sense. For example, if your point is saying more jobs will be created and your opponent's point is saying less jobs will be created, you can say your point makes more sense because the evidence you used is from 2019, while your opponent's evidence is from 1995. Some general tips. You want to respond to the contentions in the order that they were presented. Don't jump out of order. Additionally, you want to be clear with what argument you're going to refute before you start to refute it. This is called signposting. For example, you can say, in response to my opponent's second point, we have two refutes. The first refute is XYZ, and the second refute is ABC. Also, you should try to relax and think logically. Remember that every point has a refute. Your approach will also vary based on the round. If your opponents bring up many small contentions that are similar, you can group your refutes together and say something along the lines of, in response to my opponent's point about the economy, ABC. However, if your opponents have a few contentions that are generally longer, such as 2 to 3 points, you should spend longer on each point, responding to each part of the Reezy structure. Now let's analyze how much time the first speaker should be spending on each part that we have gone over. For the proposition's first speaker, they should be spending less than 30 seconds on the hook and introduction. They should then be spending 30 seconds on the extra information and background information as well as the definition. This is just the important information the judge should know before you actually get into the contentions. The most important part of the first proposition speech is bringing up your own points. As the first speaker, the goal is to present 2 to 3 points, so the first proposition speaker should be spending between 3 to 4 minutes on bringing up their own contentions. As the first opposition speaker, you also have a fourth component to touch on, which is refutes. Again, your hook and introduction should be less than 30 seconds. You should be providing extra information and background information, as well as definitions in the event that your opponents didn't already do so, and that should take approximately 30 seconds. Then you should spend 1 to 2 minutes responding to each part of your opponent's points. You should do this at the start of your speech before you bring up your own points, again, so that your opponent's points are fresh in your judge's mind. And finally, you should be presenting between 1 to 3 points at the end of your speech, and this should take approximately 2 to 3 minutes. However, keep in mind that at the end of the day, the times given are just suggestions, and you know what's best and most logical in each round. Also, if you're just starting out in debate, don't be alarmed if you're not meeting the recommended times. It's much more important to address each component rather than to stick to strict time limits. For example, for the opposition one speaker, as long as you're giving an introduction, your background information, refute, and contentions, you're good to go. This is a more long-term goal to try to reach these recommended timings. Thank you for watching this video. If you have any questions, please feel free to leave them in a comment below. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe for more videos like this, and best of luck on your debate journey. Have a nice day.